thanks to the organisers for the opportunity to talk here today. So, look at the tricks. This is my first time talking about air quality, so hopefully it goes okay. So I'm going to talk about my experience of communicating air quality for, I guess, the last 10 years or so, the lessons I've learned along the way, communication channels that we use, initiatives and events to raise awareness and to educate, some data on knowledge, attitudes, perception and behaviour, and then also something that I found in my search whilst researching for this lecture, the HEAL Toolkit, which is a useful resource for communicating the science of air quality. So when I started about 10 years ago, this is probably one of my first big public engagements. It was an event organised by the Asthma Society of Ireland, and they were calling for a ban on smoky coal. And this was December 2014, and I went to the event and gave my talk. This was in the Mansion House in Dublin, and I think the talk went okay. I was talking about the Sapphire project, started doing measurements in Killarney, County Kerry, and the results were already interesting, just like Yogita talked about, those high pollution events during the evenings. We were seeing the same thing in Killarney as well, and I was reporting this information. Afterwards, I did an interview with Paul Cullen, the health correspondent for the Irish Times. I didn't think anything more of it, and then I was on the plane to the UK to do a PhD exam, and then I turned on my phone when we landed, and the phone was going crazy, all the messages and missed calls and everything. And it was because of this article that was published in the Irish Times, written by Paul Cullen. The content of the article is fine, but it's when you look at the headline that really caught a lot of attention. Air pollution in Killarney, 6 times the EU limit. Now, I didn't say that, and I don't think Paul Cullen does either in the article, but it just goes to show how information gets translated, and the headline writers use that just to get you to click on the article. I missed phone calls from Matt Cooper trying to get me on the show. Luckily, I was in the UK, so I could avoid all that. But the key thing here that I learned was that I was talking about peaks of air pollution at 160 microgram per meter cubed, and that was an hourly average. And then just for reference, because people have no idea, I was referring to the annual limit values at the time for PM2.5, which were 25 microgram per meter cubed. Okay, so that's 6 times lower than what we were measuring. And somebody made the simple sum and put that headline up. Okay, so that's my very first experience, was actually a lesson. And there were 2 elements of that. First of all, actually I contacted Paul Cullen, and he said, oh, sorry about that. It was the headline writer that made these headlines, and so we got it changed. So in the archive now, we have a more benign headline, but still quite concerning, I suppose. Air pollution in Killarney is 10 times higher at night. Okay, but less clickbaity, right? But still accurate, but a bit more boring maybe. The content of the article was fine. It's still the same. So the lesson number 1 is beware of the headline writers. Okay, we're sucked in by the headlines. They want that dramatic headline, that story for you to click on. And 2, personal lesson for me, and I think maybe others in the EPA and other communicators are aware of this as well, be very careful when communicating pollution levels in relation to EU, WHO limit and guideline values. That is a really tricky area because people make those sorts of very simple mathematical errors that we wouldn't necessarily do ourselves. We moved on from Killarney to Enniscorthy, and I had a nice interview with somebody, and I got a very straight report in the Wexford People. I've got my old stock photograph from a long time ago when I had hair as well. And then an interview with a journalist who wrote this article for the Enniscorthy Guardian, and he was very good, actually. He was very engaged with what we were doing, and of course, but he had to create this headline as well: "Our towns are lost in Dickensian-style smog." Again, looking for the drama a bit, but the content of the article was fine. What I learned from this, though, was that they're very attracted to images to get people to read the article. And so they wanted photographs of people doing things. So as our researchers setting up the kit on the roof of the container, or standing by the very expensive instrumentation, and we thought this would be the selling point, a €500,000 aerosol mass spectrometer that's given us all the answers. But the key that this guy focused on was Ian with these filters. So we were collecting air filters, these large filters about the size of a small plate, and the clean ones are white, and the dirty ones are black, and you can see that black one in the middle there. That's a 24-hour particulate matter exposure, okay? And he was fascinated by this. And when we were, a few years later, that's why the photograph appeared in the article, a few years later, we were visited by George Lee to talk about the ban on smoky coal. This is probably about 2019 or something. And we were in the lab, so we didn't have any kit to show him other than the filters, and he was fascinated by the filters as well. So these simple images are really important, I think, when communicating. They were drawn to that, and they appeared on this TV clip. So lesson number 3, identify the images that best convey your message. And 4, obviously, you need to identify the words and phrases that also best convey your message. You can probably beat the headline writers at their own game, all right, if you come out with strong enough statements that have an impact. And John Soto, my colleague in UCC, was very good at doing this. He's always seeking attention, of course, and you know, headlines regularly from him are like this one for Enniscorthy, air pollution turning Enniscorthy into New Delhi of Ireland. And so they automatically pick up on this. I followed suit, because genuinely, I think later on that same year, Letterkenny did have higher pollution levels than New Delhi, okay, on one night. So I think that can be a tool if you want to use it in a certain way. You can control the narrative. So you can use strong and impactful statements to create your own headlines if you want that level of impact. Also, I think I've learned through interviews with journalists too, sometimes you don't quite find the right words during the conversation. And I find it useful to say, oh, can I just send you a quote on that later on? And I think that actually is helpful because you get a more accurate and probably a more succinct statement then going into the press. That's another tip that I've learned along the way. Radio interviews are quite good fun. You can be a bit nervous if you're being listened to by 300,000 people on the Claire Burns show. But I think some of those shows can be very effective. They've got a large listenership. Okay, you get a large reach, and often the level is a conversation, and sometimes they can be good conversations that go on for quite some time, so they can be effective. Also, local radio is useful too. I noticed Yogita had several radio interviews with local radio. You reach a different type of audience. You have more local impact, and importantly for us, I think it's like a training ground, right? I think you do learn by doing. So I've learned from doing radio interviews. So, lesson number 7, it is not a science lesson. Interviewers want information and preferably a conversation. This is radio, okay? Information plus a conversation. And lesson 8, try to connect with the audience by using common everyday experiences and plain language. If you're walking down the street on a walk in the evening, you might smell that pollution, etc., etc. Other ways to get a message out is to write your own articles. So we have in the past used op-eds, okay? And on the left, we have an example. John Soto and I piggybacked on the high pollution levels in New Delhi to say that not all air pollution is visible like this. We have invisible air pollution in Ireland. Just because the air looks clean doesn't mean to say it is. And we wrote an article on that. And my colleague Dean Venables recently used International Clean Air Day to promote the new idling ban policy in UCC and also called for this to be wider spread. So take an opportunity when you see one. You can write blog-style articles too. RTE Brainstorm is very useful for that. That they certainly like to get academics to talk about their research or current issues. David O'Connor, who was here, has used this effectively to talk about his bioaerosol and pollen research. And short films. So with research projects, we found that short films can be effective. We did this for Sapphire. We've just had a new series of films released on the Dublin Port Air project as well. So you can find those on YouTube quite easily. On to initiatives. It's already been mentioned. I think education is key, and catching them when they're young, catching them in school, engaging, I think is really, really good. I looked at the material in the Clean Air Week from last year, and it was really good. If we can make that compulsory, maybe, I think that would be brilliant, like part of the curriculum, because I think it's really good material, and it's not just air quality, it's the broader sustainability issue enveloped within that. And of course, the Clean Air Together campaigns, I think, have also been very effective at raising awareness among the general public, and the citizen science element is important. It's participation. It's not just listening. It's not passive, it's active. Cork City Council, and there are representatives here from Cork City Council, did a great job on the International Day of Clean Air for the Blue Skies, which was on September the 7th. They went all out and they organised a nice series of events with an official opening, a lunchtime fun cycle, air quality info hub in the city, and a roundtable discussion in the evening. They also did some nice work on messaging, some simple messaging, both on their website, but also around the city. They had banners posted up with information on it as well. And I think, miraculously, Cork actually had a blue sky on the day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. Not that was due to our activities, just a luck, I think. Car-free Sunday was a couple of weeks later, adopted widely throughout Europe, and I think there's indications that actually had an impact on air quality in Cork. Dean Venables and Kevin Ryan are looking into that. And a very eye-catching initiative that's been promoted for next year in the UK is Clean Air Night. Okay, so I think they're going to highlight a lot of issues around wood burning, which is a growing problem in the UK, and I think that's going to culminate in a Clean Air Night in January 2024. Okay, a couple of minutes left. Are the messages getting through to the general public? Okay, and if you look at the literature of people who've done surveys, this survey here has looked at the public perception of air pollution across 7 European countries. And when you ask them to identify the sources of air pollution, they immediately put industry as number one. This is recent research. So despite all our efforts across Europe, we're seeing industry is incorrectly perceived as the most pollutant sector in all countries. And then traffic. The importance of agriculture and household activities is underestimated. What about Ireland? And some great work from Keith in the HSC. Also did a very similar survey on knowledge, attitudes, and perception about air quality in Ireland. Unfortunately, industry and traffic are also perceived as the most polluting sectors as well. So despite all our efforts, that's still the perception. Okay, industry and traffic. The majority of people didn't know where NO2 came from. Less than 50% of people were able to identify PM as a harmful pollutant. And worryingly, people don't know where to go for air quality information. EPA was only number 2 here on that list. So obviously, we need to do better. But we also need to get other people to do better as well. Because if you do a Google image search on air pollution in Ireland, look at all these images. Thankfully, EPA is first there. But 3/4 of those images are industry emissions, all right? Even when we're talking about solid fuel burning or traffic, it's still industry emissions. So we need to change those images before we're going to get a change in perception. There is a need for better communication. We all have a role to play in that. The EPA are doing their job. I think this is a great report, the New Style Air Quality Report in 2022. Note the images, no industry emissions, so I think they're also doing very, very well. I think the EPA have a very important role to play. And also, I think we also need to bring in other people, not just the scientists that are looking at air quality. We also need to bring in people that are looking at behavior as well. Okay, so this work by colleagues in Cork was looking at attitudes and perception about air quality forecasts. And the research showed that they are likely to engage and educate the public about the health and environmental risks of air pollution. You do need to have a diversified messaging approach depending upon the receiver of the information. And that citizens should be involved. Get citizens involved, I think, is a good way to increase knowledge, awareness, and then your attitudes. That might change behavior. And that has led to an SFI project in the National Challenge Fund called Behave iAir. Okay, the Behave iAir team will work with community groups to co-create engaging and effective messages around air quality alerts. These messages will be combined with air quality forecasts and timely information and advice that engages people and encourages healthy behaviours. So we're making the link now between information and behaviour. I think that's what we need to do. It'd be interesting to see how it works out. Just very quickly, the HAIL Toolkit, I found this along the way, a science to policy communications toolkit for anyone working on clean air advocacy. It's a great guide. I encourage you to have a look at it if you're involved in advocacy work. And one of the key areas for me was that they have these tips on where to direct your message. You can look at health impacts. You can look at solutions, economic cost of pollution, co-benefits of action, inequalities as mentioned earlier on, vulnerable groups, and so on. And all of these, you can have a simple statement, or you can build a message based upon national, European data, or national or city level data as well. And just to finalize, it's good to see that communications is part of the new Clean Air Strategy for Ireland. So I think we all together need to harness all the research, harness our expertise and efforts, and make sure that we use it to ensure effective clean air strategy for Ireland overall. Okay, thanks.